get some more. But it was all physical labor. And I mean, if you didn't have the physical acumen to stay up with this thing, you just didn't work because somebody else got the job.
Right.
So it was a tough life in so many respects. Well, and another thing too, for the working guy, there was not a heck of a lot left out of his salary when he got through paying for his food, his housing, his clothes, and the medicine and everything else that he might need. There's very little left over for entertainment, recreation, or anything like that. And so the recreation was very modest, maybe a picnic in the park on a weekend or something like that, or going over to relatives and spending an afternoon there or something like that. They didn't go to shows often. There was a lot of free concerts in those days in the parks and things like that, free things. And they were fun. They were fun things. I remember as a kid, it was fun to go to the park and hear the band playing and everything else and run around with your friends and everything else. It wasn't all bad.
Yeah. Well, and that's and talking more, you said that the working man has it so much better nowadays than back then because of that. But don't you think, just to create debate, I guess, I mean, but there was work. I mean, granted, it was hard work and it wasn't really well-paying work.
It was
but
cyclical.
there was work.
It was cyclical. Sometimes there was lots of work, everybody was busy, then there was other times when things were slow. And that's the things, when things were slow, boy, it was tough because they had no backlog unless they could save a little money for such circumstances, which they didn't always have an opportunity to do. So they had to live off their relatives or some friends or something, whoever, like in the Depression. People, that's one of the nice things about the Depression is that people finally realized that they had a lot of caring and sympathy and understanding for other people and a lot of empathy, because if you had something to eat and your neighbor didn't, you shared it with them. And that went on all over. That was one time in my lifetime when people were very benevolent in everything they did and looked out for the other person and the other person looked out for them. If you have something today and you don't have it tomorrow, don't worry, because one of your friends will help you out. And in spite of all that, it sounds dreary. It wasn't, because people found humor in their lifestyle. They laughed at themselves, which was a good thing, because there wasn't a heck of a lot to really laugh about.
Right.
But they'd see some humor in it. It wasn't. I don't remember that it was a depressing time. It was a depressing time from the standpoint of money, but only in that reason. If you could overlook that and manage to live on less, you could find a lot of happiness in that lifestyle, particularly because friends were real friends, and everybody, strangers on the streets, once you get talking, they're friendly. It's not like now. As long as I've lived in California and here, which is a great many years now, almost 50, better than 50, I've gotten used to these fences around every backyard. And I don't seem to mind it so much. But every time I go back to the Middle West and see those open backyards, clear for a whole long block that we've always had back there, and they still have, and we kids used to play football across 4 or 5 yards, like that, and the neighbors would talk over the back fence. They'd be out hanging their clothes on the line and chit-chatting and everything else, or sitting on the front porch drinking lemonade in the evening together and everything. All that is gone. I mean, I'm as friendly as most people, I guess, and so are my neighbors. But we never see each other.
Right.
It just doesn't fit into our scheme of things. And that's the way things have changed. from that standpoint, the old days were the good old days. Of course, there's a lot of reasons where they were the bad old days too. But as far as human, what shall I say, human getting together. That was the time. That was when it was really great.
Yeah. And now, well, in today's work environment, obviously people are compensated, you know, it's monetarily or, you know, materially they're compensated better maybe than people back then.
Yeah.
But there's also, tell me some of your feelings about, during the Depression, was it possible, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, unemployment was really high and there wasn't a lot of work and all that kind of thing. And that's when, you know, some social programs, well, towards the end of the Depression, then FDR started putting in social programs and things like that. Before that, there wasn't welfare and there wasn't those kind of things.
That's right.
And you mentioned people usually got by through the good-heartedness of other people who were better off than themselves. And what were other ways? I mean, could people turn to a farm? Could people go back to the farm? I know, you know, last time we talked a little bit about the industrial age, and a lot of people started moving to the cities around the turn of the century and through the 20s.
Well, I don't know whether
was that a possibility to make a living just by having a garden or?
Well, a lot of
those kind of things.
That's
I mean, how did people? I mean, wouldn't goodwill run out after a few years, or?
You mean goodwill among your friends and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, if the Depression hit, let's say the 30s, I mean, the welfare programs didn't start till towards the end of the 30s, so you have a good 5-6 year period there.
Yeah.
I mean, where people just, I mean, I don't, you know,
well,
people's goodwill run out.
Now you
after,
wonder. Now, when you look back, your memory has lost a lot of the details, and so it's hard to wonder how you could enjoy living under the circumstances. But by gosh, we did. And as far as going back to farms, no, I don't think many people did that because the people that had been working in the plants and the factories and so forth had no ability to work on a farm to begin with. And secondly, there were plenty of people that were on the farm that stayed on the farm because there was nothing to draw them away. There were no jobs anywhere else. So the farmers probably had all the help they can use. But what was I going to say?
What was so? I mean, would people live off of the church or their friends or their relatives
well, the church,
for whole, like, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, or was there jobs here and there, or how did that?
I don't. You know, that's what I say. I can't remember those details that well. You asked some questions that I no longer remember, but there was nothing else. So somehow they must have done that. Now, there's this too that if there was a man in the house, if you have a family, a regular family, man, woman, and children, the man could find probably a little work. Maybe he could pick up a couple of bucks doing something, moving some bricks for somebody or doing something. So would tide them over, and they would mete that stuff out very carefully on how they spent it. Of course, they had some bills, like very few people were buying houses, but they had rent. So most of the people had to rent, and that had to be paid. So that was the big problem. And then food was the second big problem. Food you can eat well or eat less well, but rent is always so many bucks. You know, it's a certain battle every month.
Right.
And but anyhow.
Well, now in the Midwest now, as I'm sure you well know, they're going through a sort of depression in the last 10 years or so. with so many layoffs, especially in the cities, in
Oh, yeah.
the Flint, Michigans, the Detroit, Michigans, the Milwaukee, Wisconsins, and places like that, where there has been jobs since about the turn of the century when cars started being built and car parts started being built and things like that, all in those big Midwestern towns. And in the last 10 years, most of those jobs have left the United States.
Yeah.
But the people are still there without jobs. Um, do you? I'm just bringing this out and saying, you said that it was so much worse back then, but at the same time,
Well, they
in a
get
lot of ways things have changed, but in a lot of ways they've now come full circle.
Well, I wouldn't say it's full circle. It isn't nearly as bad as it was then. There's so many ways that the government or somebody else takes care of people that are on there or having hard times,
Right.
which wasn't there at all back in the old days. It was,
Right.
just like I say, you had to depend on your friends and your relatives and your church. They were the ones that looked out for you, and sometimes those friends included somebody that had a little company or something, and he'd say, "Well, come to work for me this week. I can use you." See,
Right.
so you'd get a little work out of it, and I had my siege of it too. When I left the band in 1936, I didn't know how well off I was. We were making $50 to $60 a week in the band, which was almost unheard of money because most people were working for $15 a week. So we were pretty well off. And then I decided to quit the band, and I thought, and in the meantime, I had been taking up photography. While I was in the band, I'd spend my days giving my services to photographic studios in exchange for learning the business. And I did that for 2 years. I started in 1934, and I did that for 2 years. And then in 1936, I thought, well, I'll go out and I'm thinking I'd just go out and knock the world over, because I'm a photographer now. But boy, I'll tell you, I didn't know how cold that world out was then. I got out of that band and didn't get that 50 or 60 bucks a week because I couldn't find a job. It was impossible to find. Well, the first thing we did, we didn't actually look for a job. We had a little money saved up, and so we took a trip to California. That was the first time we went to California. That was in '36, October of '36. And we came back in May. We spent 6 months out there, and that's another story. And then I tried to get a job, any kind of a job I could. I even started to sell photostats, which is the forerunner of Xerox copies. It was a lot more complicated to do. And I had learned how to do that somewhere along the line, and so I did that. Oh, I know, I did that later. I got a job with the Democrat newspaper, $25 a week, and 5 cents a mile for my car, and any amount of hours. Anytime they needed me, I had to be available. And some of that time was night and everything else. If there's an accident or a big fire somewhere, bingo, I get the call. And so now I forgot where I was going. Can I have a rest?
Yeah, of course.